not scheduled for replacement.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Now, concerning the wired smart meter option, there really wasn't a lot of support concerning this option. However, I would like to speak with the manufacturers just real briefly. I just have a couple questions on whether or not there's the feasibility of a wired smart meter, where the transmission is through either fiber optic or something else. Where are you as manufacturers in developing that type of option? And can we get cost information on that option if you have that available?
Rick Riccardi from Florida. It is not on our roadmap. We have spent some time contemplating that. I'm sorry. It is not on our roadmap. We have spent a bit of time contemplating that. And I can only speak from a bit of experience in that one of our sister companies manufactured a product several years ago, probably about 10 years ago, that was a wired gas solution. And the only customer that deployed it hated it. I hate to say that, but they hated it because the mechanics of keeping a wired system in place with gas meters, because you visualize how gas meters are deployed. Often they're remote from the property, often they have, they're located in pits sometimes, they're located on the outside of houses, sometimes they're in basements, depending on where in the country you are. But in general, gas meters are very difficult to reach with wires. They're visually not very pretty because you often staple wires along the side of a house, and there are complaints. If you have to trench, someone comes through with their lawnmower or their whatever and cuts the wires. The maintenance costs were horrible. A particular customer completely removed all of the wired gas meter solutions. Now, again, I can't speak for electric, but given that experience and given the lack of demand from our customers, we have seen no basis for pursuing a wired solution at this time.
Thank you. President?
Yeah, so currently there is not on our product roadmap a fiber optic or Ethernet communications module option. That's not something that we've heard from our customer base or our prospect base as something that they are finding critical to their future business.
And the same answer for us.
Okay, thank you. Jump back there then, Mr. Tobin. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. First, Mr. Tobin.
Okay, so the first question is, it sounds like, in considering some of these flash reads and such, that the real-time data that's being transmitted every few seconds from the electric meters, I'm interpreting it that it sounds like that is not actually critical to have that information for the smart grid to work. So I'd like to first ask, like as far as power generation stations, it doesn't sound like they're directly connected to the individual meters. It sounds like all that data is accumulated at like a, I don't even know the term, like a transistor or such like that, and that's how you guys are calculating the load that's being required by the power station to basically power the entire grid. So, so one question is, how vital is that second-by-second data coming from the house? Because it sounds like it's not really actually even needed for the smart grid to work. And two, just curious if you can answer honestly, if there's any other potential future project that you're planning to use the smart meters for, as far as transmitting media, telephone services, internet. Are you planning to use this particular mesh network for any other service besides just metering electricity?
Yeah, so why don't I start? So I think we got to separate a couple of things there. So the data that comes off, what the grid operators and distribution network operators know and use in order to supply voltage and amps to homes has nothing to do with what the smart meter tells you. I don't know that world that well, but they did it long before smart meters came along and long after smart meters will be here. So What we're talking about is collection of the measurement of what your home drew, though, of that power, and therefore what you owe the utility for it, in now much finer increments and gradients down to the hour or 15 minutes. But it has nothing to do with operating the grid directly, okay? Now there's some efficiencies that we can gain someday by now knowing more about how the electricity is used and what voltages are at endpoints and so on that they didn't know well. And so that is where we hope to go in the future world. But the first application we're using the smart meters on is for that incremental new information, hour by hour, 15 minutes by 15 minutes of what your consumption is. And so empowering customers, should they look at that, into saving themselves money, going on rate plans where they can more maximize the time they need to use power versus the price.
You could claim that same information a week later. There doesn't seem to be an advantage of getting it every second. Sorry.
Okay, yes. We need to have the microphone, otherwise no one's going to hear what you're saying and what
I'm sorry.
So.
Thank you. So you could still get that exact same data just an hour later, a week later, a month later, and get those exact same statistics. It doesn't need to be transmitted every 4 seconds by a smart meter.
Right. Well, in fact, remember from earlier today we talked about in my system it's transmitted 6 times a day, every 4 hours. So it's not transmitted instantaneously.
Is that a gas meter or an electric?
That's electric. Gas transmits 4 times a day. So
is that the reason why the electric meters are constantly pulsing a signal then?
Well, they're not constantly doing anything, but they do send other administrative messages and mesh setup acknowledgements among each other. That's not the meter read.
Anyone
Okay,
with
wait,
a
wait.
microwave meter
Can
can see
we
their
go
transmitted
to Mr.
constantly.
Tobin now? I'd like to keep moving on.
Thank you. My question, first observation, is all seems to be built around the fundamental concept that the electric utilities need to replicate a new telecommunications network. And my question is, based on the fact that in the telecommunications industry, telecom utilities frequently lease and obtain services or facilities from other utilities and service providers to provide their services to their customers. And my question is there any documentation here at the Commission in any of these applications, or have these utilities ever sought to, instead of outsourcing construction of their version of a smart meter that has a wireless mesh network design, put out an RFP to telecommunications service providers like AT&T or Verizon or Comcast, who knows how many of them there are, to provide this data transmission service to your locations on a huge bulk contract basis that I think would be both technically and economically viable.
Yeah, so from PG&E, back when we went through the RFP and technology vendor selection process, we did include straight cell phone applications of where the meter would go right into a cell phone data packet network type of thing, and along with Silver Springs and the other technology providers that could do this. And we selected the most cost-effective, best security, best features, price, and risk of implementation. They were considered both.
We do use those vendors for what they do best, which is to backhaul the information, and that information is secure, and they do a wonderful job of that. They do not do metering, and that's why we partnered with what we believe is to be one of the industry leaders to build the metering systems, to be able to gather that information, to be backhauled to a system where we can also turn it into a bill and effective customer services.
We actually did a study with Edison looking at using the Edison system, but we have about 60% of our customers are common with Edison. We have customers common with PG&E, SDG&E, DWP, Burbank, Glendale, and we would have essentially had to construct multiple systems, which would have been more expensive.
I'm Charlie Snyder, San Diego Gas and Electric. Sorry, Ted had to step out. I'm a co-project manager on smart meter. Like Ken at SCE, we do use AT&T and such as part of our backhaul.
I'm Martin Hyde with Southern California's for Wired Solutions, and we'd like to follow up on the wired solutions comments by the meter manufacturers. So we contacted EPRI, and EPRI is Electric Power Research Institute. They had said there is a whole wired solutions smart grid operating in Colorado somewhere, and I was wondering if any utility representatives were aware of that and if they had considered that to be an option for their smart meters wired to the grid.
So the two things, there are some small BPL deployments. I think you're speaking about Smart City in Denver, Colorado. Excel is actually not moving forward because the cost per endpoint was so catastrophic for that solution. And since then, the actual company has been acquired by S&C Electric in pieces and parts. So there are technologies that exist that we haven't seen much success at scale. We met with Assemblyman Huffman in Sacramento, who had been approached by Echelon. And the challenge we have is that none of these systems, one, are proven at scale. Two, they're not integrated into our networks and our head-end software. So for the utility, it requires setting up a standalone separate system, and that there's a ton of operational cost. One of the things you'll see in the filings is there's a lot of upfront IT systems integration and setup costs that only when it's smeared across millions of endpoints or hundreds of thousands of endpoints does it even start to beginning to look cost effective. So for this opt-out option, your cost per point will be astronomical. So those are the challenges.
To follow up, I had another question was that I understood that the smart grid, which is a separate application and different proceeding, could operate without smart meters being on every residence, just some, not having actual readings from each resident. Is that true?
Well, you have to probably define what you mean by smart grid.
Your application 1106029, the deployment. Would that operate without having a meter in each home or small business? Could you do that from substations or something?
Well, again, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Proceeding, I just thought since this is a smart meter proceeding, you might be familiar with how the smart grid works using the readout from the meters that you're putting in your homes, in our homes.
In our application for SCE, I'm not an expert on the application, but I will tell you that the smart meter plays a major portion in the implementation of the smart grid. There are bulk applications for substations, for power systems, and for transmission and distribution as well. It does play a very important part in our overall plan. That plan has been published and vetted before the CPUC.
Right, I read it.
Okay, one more question over here.
My name is Angela Flynn, and I'm wondering, the purpose of the smart grid is to save energy. That's the whole reason we're upgrading our systems. Saving money is a great benefit, but it's not the purpose. Wouldn't a fiber optic system save much more energy over a wireless system? I mean, all of that infrastructure is using a lot of energy. These meters are transmitting 24 hours a day. It's already said that they use much more energy for the electric meters and for the gas meters. Has it even been looked into what the energy savings would be to use a fiber system?
Well, any other times, Ted, I think even said this before I left, but any time we've tried to take a look at a fiber optic, it's ridiculously expensive, unfortunately, before you even consider what the power consumption is after it's installed. The cost of installation alone kind of kills that as a business idea.
Not only the installation, the operation, and really kind of the future-proofing of the system, we found that the system that we've put in place, that is largely being put in place by all the utilities, has the capability of being upgraded over the years, which is very important in terms of bringing greater functionality and greater security, being able to offer customers a wider range of programs and services. So we didn't find and haven't found that that equivalency in any other systems.
Those upgrades will cost money every time they're done.
Okay, they're not going to hear you without the microphone online. But what I'd like to do is we're at a point, I'd like to take a break now, come back, and then let's really talk about the analog meters. Okay, thank you. We'll be back in 2:45. Okay, as we start, there's a couple things just to wrap up from our prior discussions. First, understand that Mr. Wilmer and Mr. Reeves from Silver Springs, we had a discussion, clarification on some of the issues that had been raised earlier. And Mr. Reeves, if you could,
sure,
give the, and let's get a microphone.
Thanks. So I think the question had been, how does the introduction or the existence of an antenna on the smart meter, how does that affect the power output? So I think a couple different ways of answering this. So first off, I'd say this is a very technical area, and I'm not at all trying to convey that I am an RF engineer. I'm sure there's other smart RF engineers here in the room. So let's look at this a couple ways. So first off, the FCC measures the maximum permissible exposure by looking at the face of the meter at the at the area of antenna peak, and also assuming 100% duty cycle. So that is how the exposure is measured. Our product operates on average, and we provided data to external sources at approximately 0.05%. So that is 1/2000th of the FCC exposure. So just want to clarify that. But the FCC regulation does allow for a 3 dB antenna, which antenna does allow the power to be unevenly distributed and focused within space. And so therefore the assertion that our product emits 1 watt is correct. But with the antenna, as you measure that in space, if you're on the kind of the focus point of the antenna, then you can measure up to 2 times that field strength.
Thank you. And then there is a question in the back on the wired option.
Thank you. Ernest Pacheco, Communication Workers from American District 9. Earlier in the proceedings, the earlier representative, the previous representative from SDGE and the PG&E representative alluded to a cost analysis for a hardwired option, including a look at telephone, using telephone lines. No numbers were ever discussed, and I was hoping to hear what that cost was determined to be and what the problems were determined to be.
All right. Well, this is PG&E. I do have costs on our wired option, and in terms of all the operational aspects, not just the phone line, but all the other material handling and aspects of putting a wired meter in and hooking it up to the phone line, we think that in our base radio off case, we're looking at 135 upfront and 20 a month becomes something on the order of 650 upfront and $30 a month when you account for all the costs. And one of the things that we did do is, I think, and Rick talked about later from Clara, was we still assume we have to meter read the gas meter because we're not aware or maybe even believe that there's realistic, reliable wire technology to gas modules. So that's why the costs to some degree are going to look very high, because we still have to read the gas meter even though the electric meter is now wired and would not require a meter reader. So my costs dramatically go higher.
Likewise for SDG&E, the same concept that Jim has, we have. We looked at it from our existing wired solution to basically install a dedicated line, to get to initiate the line. The meter itself is a very costly meter. Then within the meter you put a modem. Jim said 600. We're over 1,000 based on our estimates, and we're at approximately $40 a month. Now, like Jim, we are a gas and electric utility, and we also calculated a truck roll to read the gas meter, which is included in that $1,000 and the monthly cost.
I'm sorry, so the gas, you would not have to have separate metering of the gas, or some rolling out to the gas?
There is no wired solution for gas. We would still be required to get the monthly read for the gas, so we would roll a vehicle to obtain that read.
So $40 a month would include that? $1,000 plus $4 a month would include the
$40 a month as well as would include.
One more question. So your analysis of this, you submitted this in your application, and we have access to actually take a close look at it.
At this point, San Diego Gas and Electric has not submitted an application. The only utility that has an application on file is PG&E. The other utilities have not submitted proposals at this point. So in terms of what information they're giving you at this time, is estimates. We're not going to hold them to saying, well, you promised this. I think they've done in good faith the estimates of what they think the costs are, but until a formal application or formal proposal is filed, we are not, we're giving, what I hope is the utilities are giving what their best estimates are at the time, but, with the information that we're examining at this point.
That is correct. These are preliminary costs based on upfront assumptions that may change when and if we're required to do a filing. But yes, these are the best based on the knowledge of what we have out there in the field today.
I'm sorry, clarification. So PG&E is the one that's filed an official application. So detailed analysis of their hardwired telephone option line is in that application?
No, I don't believe the costs of the wire line are included. The detailed costs that went along with the application are the ones that back the proposal in the application, which is ready to go off.
I guess my next question, my follow-up question would be, how do we get a chance to review what the analysis was in which they produced their costs for the hardwired telephone line? Is this something that CPUC could instruct the utilities to provide for us for review, since there is public concern for its option?
Does DRA have that information, or?
I don't believe that's in the work papers, is it?
Not at this level. We did this particularly for the workshop, Your Honor, with your direction.
Okay. Let me consider how we should do this to get the information, because I know parties will need to do that if they're filing the formal proposals. Okay. Okay, a follow-up question, go ahead.
The cost for the wiring cost, you were saying like $30 a month or whatever. To me, it sounds a little unrealistic, since that first DSL costs $30 a month, plus all the internet stuff. But secondly, are you also factoring the savings you made from firing all the guys who went out to read the meters? Is that calculated in this? Is this a net increase, or I'm not quite sure exactly where you get your numbers from? It seems they seem astronomical.
These are the costs, PG&E. These are the costs that we estimate become incremental to an opt-out customer that will now require meter reading, whereas in theory all the other customers do not require manual meter reading anymore because they're on the smart meter system. So even in a wired system, what I was saying is we would have a dedicated phone line and the wiring necessary to make the meter talk to a phone line. So we wouldn't send a meter reader for the electric read, but we would be required to send a meter reader for the gas read in the case of the customers on both commodities from us.
So you're saying...
Okay,
I'm just confused with the numbers. The $30, is that
okay, it's their incremental, what they've said is it's their incremental cost, which takes into consideration that there won't be meter readers for the gas, for the electric meters, but that they will still need meter readers for the gas.
Meter readers for the gas.
So it's like $30 to read a meter?
There's a monthly charge for a phone line. We all have a phone line. There would be a monthly charge for the dedicated phone line.
Okay. There is a question via email. We'd like to get to that one.
I think this question was asked somewhat, and if we could start with Edison answering it moving forward for utilities. Why is it costing more to get what we've had all along? We've had analog and meters and meter readers. So why is it suddenly cost prohibitive to have the same thing, to pay more for the same? This is from Susan Brinkman, Center for Electrosmog Prevention. Ken, can we start with you? Thank you.
Well, all I can say is that we, at the CPUC's request, and has been said numerous times here today under their authorization, developed a business case to develop smart metering and to implement smart metering to our customers. So we have a business case that was approved by the Commission to do that. Changes to that business case that are under consideration at this time come in incremental costs. That has also been stated by the Commission, that there will be costs to be borne by those who choose to opt out. So that is the general principles that we're working within. We've not decided what those opt-out alternatives will be at this time, nor I think definitively priced all those alternatives. But we have been clear, and it has been made clear to us, that we have first a business case that we need to and have been authorized to execute well. And then we second have this consideration, which is a separate and incremental cost.
Right, so agreed, this is PG&E again. And so the base case now, if you will be that meter reading is performed in an automated fashion, and the costs associated with running the smart meter system are now what are in the general rate case. Costs to have meter readers or these other charges and expenses that are required to run one of the customer choice platforms are incremental then to that base case.
We're in the same situation. A major portion of the benefits of our case is that we will no longer have meter readers. And so if we have to reemploy meter readers, that's an incremental cost. Because our case assumes that we no longer have meter readers.
Likewise, sound like I'm repeating everything they said, but as true at SDG&E, we do have...
Just speak into the microphone, please.
Sorry. Likewise, at SDG&E, we had the business case. The assumption was that meter readers would go away with some of the options that are being discussed today. We are asking to bring meter readers back, and that will be an incremental cost.
Okay. Any more questions on wired opt-out, or else I'd like to go to the analog meters?
Just
one more question.
Yes.
Okay.
Just irrespective, is that on? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Irrespective of how the data would be backhauled to your head end, are the meters that are being deployed currently capable of transmitting their information over a wire if there was a way to backhaul it efficiently to the head end?
In the case of PG&E, no, there's no wired connectivity to the meter and the metrology measuring kWh in our meters as they're currently installed.
Can you add a card?
Not in any realistic way. That'd be a new meter. There's no slot per se or a way to extend or change the connection capability of the meter. So
the meter can only be used as a wireless transmitter. That's the only way to do it.
Well, or its radio can be turned off, as we talked about as one of our options. So
okay.
Same here for Edison.
Obviously, same for SDG&E, and I'll let you know we are 98% deployed. And
just as far as what's out there in the market, are there wired meters that are being installed domestically? Because I've heard Idaho Power and Light is going to be using power meters, or rather wired meters, and also Kansas City is using wired meters.
Okay, can any of the manufacturers respond to that?
Can you repeat the question, please? Are you aware of any wired meters being deployed anywhere in the country?
Yes, Duke has a small amount. I'm not familiar with who's deploying it. Idaho Power.
Idaho Power, the way, and in Kansas City Municipal Power.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that, yeah, I don't know who's it though.
And the wired option at Duke, unless I'm mistaken, is actually a power line carrier. So you've got RF signal going over your power line into your house.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do is let's. Okay, go ahead.
Just add a little bit. One of Aclara's companies produces a PLS or power line system which transmits information over the power lines. But I can't speak with any technical expertise on the performance or operation of that. But it is a wired system in that it uses the existing power lines to transmit information back to the system, to the head end. The limitations tend to be the amount of data that can be transmitted and the amount of time it takes to transmit that information. But again, I can't give you much more information than that.
Okay, we're going to move on the analog meter and just a traditional digital meter at this point. And that is either retention for those customers who have not yet had a smart meter installed, retention of an existing analog meter, or replacement of a smart meter with an analog meter. And then as a subset, what had been raised by SDG&E, which is using a digital meter with no radio transmission capability. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Dr. Ross, because she had a question on cost, I believe. Is that correct? Dr. Ross over there. And let's start with her question, and then we'll go on with questions from there.
Yes, thank you. I had a question on the cost of a digital meter. The cost of an analog meter, the cost to you of it. And also, how many analog meters does PG&E have in stock, or do its vendors have available to it?
Okay, so the cost of an analog meter, in the days when we used to buy analog meters, where in the volumes PG&E bought them were somewhat less than $20 for a residential grade, sort of run-of-the-mill analog meter. We don't carry that stock anymore, per se. I sort of don't know if I could promise they're completely gone from every shelf, but we don't, as any kind of rule or routine, carry analog meters at all. We're a complete smart meters based operation now, and like I've stated earlier today, are 86% deployed now with our electric smart meters. Did I cover all your?
Okay. And Mr. Watt.
I have two questions that segue from the recent answers about incremental costs that I heard from the bench. First of all, how do the utilities define what are incremental costs? And second of all, in your construction of incremental costs of the analog meter option, do you include incremental benefits associated with the analog meter? For example, reduced depreciation charges associated with long life analog meters versus 20-year life smart meters?
Our definition of incremental costs are, we added up only the specific and identifiable costs that we could estimate that would take to run the option program. And we have taken a look at what it would take to run a mechanical, or let's call it a radio out meter for the purpose of today's workshop. So what I mean by that is these costs would not be incurred, really, if not for the fact that we would offer this option to customers. And in our case, we used an estimate of 145,000 customers would suggest the option. So, I'm sorry, the second half of your question.
The second half was, do you include incremental benefits associated with the analog meter versus smart meters? For example, reduced depreciation charges?
Well, we do when the costs are compiled and they're put through the sort of revenue requirement generators, the depreciations of the meters are considered. And I don't know, I'm not a rate witness, but if there is a depreciation difference between a digital meter and an analog meter, that was taken into consideration. I don't know, though, that they are different.
For us, our case, as I mentioned before, $1.6 billion that was approved by the California Public Utilities Commission is the base case. We do not yet have an application in place, but the base case was really a consideration of what are the costs to implement smart metering versus the benefits. And our benefits, as many have said here, were broken into operational and really customer response benefits. And so we are expected to track those and report those out, and we do it on a quarterly basis. If we were asked to file an application and we had an opt-out, we would have to look at what benefits, in a reconciliation, what benefits would be impacted by a change in the program, fundamental change in our program.
Well, if I could just be more explicit, for example, if the commission authorizes an analog meter opt-out program, then for each analog meter installed, the utility would need one fewer smart meter, and therefore the utility would be relieved of the obligation of paying for that smart meter, including principally depreciation charges. Would that be considered in your cost estimates for the analog option?
Well, at this time, I don't think the commission has provided guidance on how we would open up our current approved cases and look at the new opt-out versus those current approved cases. I think this is the first step in that direction to consider the options. But I think it would, and I know the only application on record calls for a series of steps to determine that as you move forward. But I would say that we could not, in our current case, capture the same benefits with an analog meter that we can with a smart meter. That was a premise that was based on our case.
At SDG&E, answering the two questions. The first one, incremental costs were based on all the costs associated with the implementing the opt-out program. I think earlier these gentlemen talked about the different cost drivers, be it network enhancement, meter reading, et cetera. Yes, those are all the incremental costs that will go into that have gone into our preliminary cost. Concerning the depreciation question, we have not run these costs through any of our revenue requirement models yet at this time. The question concerning we're not buying a smart meter for this premise, well, the smart meter is being purchased under another filing, another business case, and we'd have to probably reconcile via that business case.
We have not done any cost analysis yet.
Mr. Martino. No, go to Mr. Martino first.
My question is, well, I guess my question is directed to you, Your Honor, because the assumption that is made here, and this was actually included in your inclusion of retroactivity for consent to have a smart meter installed. What is being raised, what is being assumed here is, and assumed by the course and by all of the discussion here, is that these installations of smart meters is legitimate, that the whole project has legitimacy. Well, you didn't want me to raise the question then, when and where would the question of the legitimacy of the smart meter project be raised? Because it would seem to me that that really has to be satisfied and decided first before these questions can be answered.
Okay, Mr. Martino, you have filed a separate application specifically on this.
Yes.
That is going to be covered in that proceeding. So that's where we'll be addressing it. And yes, I am the assigned ALJ, and I will be addressing them separately.
Excellent. Would you tell everybody what the number of this it is for so that they can look it up?
I do have it with me right now.
It's A11
A11
07009.
07009. Okay, so if you wish to look at that application and comment from Rosie.
Mr. Martino, I also wanted to respond and say the legitimacy of smart meters were discussed in detail beginning 2003 and 2004 and 5 and 6. But I can give you those application numbers as well if you'd like.
I have them.
Okay.
That's what I'm calling in question.
Okay.
You've told us how much an analog and a digital non-transmitting meter costs. Could you tell us how much the PG&E Silver Springs network model of the smart meter costs?
The unit cost of a meter with the Silver Springs card in it,
Yeah, PG&E meter.
it's almost right at $100 for residential 2S radio.
Question from staff. Is there some clarification about what we're calling digital meter with radio out? The difference between that and a smart meter with radio off. Is there a substantial difference in your mind in terms of the electronics, the construction, and the functionality of a digital meter with the radio out versus a smart meter with the radio off? And what are the differences?
No, I don't think we look at them as being substantially different. These communication cards are, in our case anyway, separate units, and they're inserted into a meter during a manufacturing process, but they are separable. So when you buy a digital meter with the radio out, I mean, you're getting fundamentally the same metrology that you got with smart meter radio off.
Well, we would have. I think I'd have to defer to our vendor to answer that. But fundamentally, you don't have the capability to re-enable the radio. If you do have a customer that moves into that residence and does want smart meter capability, so there is, you could do a meter replacement, but you would have a meter in place that could be re-enabled.
Ken is correct, and as what Jim said, our metrology is fundamentally the same in both meters.
I have a question about living together. So, if I understand it correctly, once a business case has been made for a smart meter technology, then the analog meter is seen as a kind of throwback outside of that case, and then there are incremental costs associated with keeping that meter, correct? Now, so far, I think what has been presented, maybe accurately in some cases, is that people who are interested in not having the wireless technology are a very small percentage number. Yet there are areas in California where this is decidedly not the case. If we look at the areas, the counties and towns that file jurisdictions or moratoriums, it adds up, I believe, I'm not exaggerating, to something like 25% of the population of PG&E service area. Then if we take a microcosm of that, which would be my particular neighborhood, of just 50 houses in Point Reyes Station, what we have, and I've talked to everyone there, I would say 80 to 90% of that group of houses would opt out of the smart meter program. So that leads me to two wonderings. How is it really opting out of the smart meter program if then, in response to that, PG&E would be installing a number of collectors to service a small number of homes and maintaining a mesh network? Secondly, in terms of cost, if you have an area like Fairfax or Sevastopol or West Marin or different places where the majority of people would wish to retain their analog meters, again, back to my neighborhood, we have 50 houses who would be paying thousands of dollars a year to have no change. And it doesn't seem like it would be inconveniencing the smart meter program to maintain communities, neighborhoods, and towns as their wishes were. So there's a question here somewhere. And I'm not sure I'm formulating it well, but it's something like, we have a panel here of people who are promoting wireless meters, so I'm not sure we have the depth of research on wired options that we might have if Google was in the room, or Verizon. But how is this going to work in terms of a true opt-out if my neighborhood is blanketed with a mesh network that is unwanted by, say, 80 to 90% of the neighborhood? We're calling that an opt-out. I'm not quite getting that.
Well, let me address a little bit of that. There was a question there. Thank you. And that is, we don't find anything like those numbers that you just talked about. 25% of our territory, 80% of given geographies. We did a survey of our customer base, and we overweighted the survey respondents towards the areas that have called for moratoriums and have been activists, if you will, in this area. And we came up with 2.7%. We have, as we already spoke about today, a very active deferral list. Even when we add up all the people who've called into our deferral list and everybody else who's even just sort of not made it convenient for us to change the meter, the number is about 100,000 meters, excuse me, not customers, but 75,000 customers who've called us all in out of our close to 6 million customers we serve. So we don't find anything close to your numbers, to be honest with you. We do, if there was a particular geography in the end that the vast majority of the homeowners opted out, selected choice, I'm sure with Don Reeves and the smart technology guys we use, we could find a better way than a relay for every missing meter, or I said 10 to 1 earlier today, but I'm sure we could find smarter ways to do it if there was vast missing parts of the mesh.
Okay. Sherry.
Maybe you can, maybe I misread the poll, but I thought I had read in one of PG&E's submissions that you had conducted a poll where you came up with 11% considering opt-out. Is that an old poll that's been overruled by the 2%?
I'll defer to any other PG in the room. I'm not aware of any poll that came up with anything close to that.
Okay, just Mama.
Yes, Sandy Barrett, EMF Safety Network. We just completed a survey of 443 people. The survey was distributed online through different social media outlets. And out of 387 people who answered the question, 94% wanted to retain their analog meters, and 92% felt that they didn't feel that they should pay for that option. And then second part of this is I think if the utilities would publish full disclosure on how the meters actually transmit radiation, you might see a larger opt-out. So the 30-day question, which is if the smart meters have a useful life of 20 years, according to Itron and Silver Springs, because I asked them, and they said about 20 years. And the analog meters, according to another expert, have about twice that expected life, useful life of about 40 years. Have the utilities considered the cost factor in terms of the opt-out option that the analog actually has a much longer useful life than the smart meter does? Talking about cost.
Right. So, and one of the things that go back to is a point that Ken made a minute ago, which is very important. The benefits that go with smart meter, sort of far outstrip the costs of the meter itself. Our case when we submitted it was judged cost effective on the long run benefit generation. With a smart meter is far more possible than with an analog meter. The depreciations that the utilities are allowed to use on mechanical or digital meters are set by PUC rules, and they are what they are.
In our survey, 174 people actually had meters on their homes, and 14% of those, their bills increased by 10%, 12% their bills increased by 20%. And what he was talking about, the benefits.
Okay,
I want
okay.
to reality check about this is people's experiences. This is what people are experiencing. 8% of them, their bills have doubled or more.
Oh.
That's about cost. That's about cost. That's about benefits.
If one side raises the issue, the other side can raise it too.
We've got costs too, you know?
Okay, let me just, going back to just, because I want to focus really on your question about the useful life. Okay, why don't we focus on that? We're not going to talk about cost or benefits. I mean, that's the wise in some respect. And I'm sorry, ma'am, I will ask that you not be disruptive. Okay, going back to useful life, we are looking at if we were to look at an analog meter versus a smart meter versus what you were saying was the digital meters with no communication capability. For the current analog meters that are in place, do you have any sense of what their remaining useful life is on the ones that are installed?
At PG&E, we have, at various times over the last few years, including our last GRC, we have provided some data on remaining life and even failure rates and things like that that are happening in the analog meters. So I'm sure we could present that. I didn't bring that with me today.
I'm sorry, I don't have that useful life. Again, just really, there's no comparison in terms of the kind of benefits that you're trying to provide to move forward.
Well, I'm just looking at useful life.
No,
okay, you don't have that. Thank you. About the San Diego.
And at San Diego, and like I said, we're down to 90% deployed, and the number we have out there are very small, and I'm sure they all vary in their lifespan right now, where some could be years, some could be 20 years, but I have no information on that at this point.
Okay, if you could get that information to me, I would like to know, what is the remaining useful life of analog meters, because I would like to get a sense of whether the 40-year life you're assuming for a new analog meter, a 40-year life versus a 20, 30-year life for the digital meters, and then taking into consideration what's the availability of analog versus digital meters. Yeah, I'd like to get a sense of what's there. And Mr. Weil, go ahead.
Just hoping to move things along. In PG&E's last general rate case, they used remaining depreciation lives, not necessarily actual lives, of 18 years. SCE's current GRC uses 16 years.
Okay, thank you.
Just before, you had mentioned that the entire meter, being the meter and the communication module, costs about $100. Could you please break that down, how much the actual meter costs and how much the actual wireless module costs per piece?
I can't actually do that. We buy it as one unit from our meter manufacturer that includes the communications module, so I only know it as one set price.
But that communication module can be, how is that attached to the meter? Is it welded or soldered on, or can that be just popped off with your fingers?
I believe one of these kids do a better job.
I'm not in the manufacturing side of the business, so I know that our communication modules are attached to the meter at the time of manufacture of the meter in the meter plant. They are not field replaceable. They're not even replaceable by the utility. If there's an issue with the meter, the comms module, they're sent together back to the meter plant, and then they are refurbished there.
Okay.
And also they're under a sealed cover with security tamper seals underneath, so you can't get to them to replace.
Okay, I'd like to shift right now to a slightly different portion of the analog meter opt-out proposals, which is the actual cost that should be paid by customers to opt out. And they range from proposals that there should be no cost assessed to the customers. And then Aglet has proposed a $2 per month per meter charge for people who are opting out. I would like to get some idea from Mr. Weil on how he came up with that number. And then the state of Maine had adopted some costs for opting out, and Mr. Wilmer had advocated for those. So let's go with Mr. Weil first.
Your Honor, from a policy perspective, I don't think there should be any charge. However, I am respectful of the notion that human beings tend to waste things if they're free, which is actually behind a good deal of the water meter installation impetus in California. So I use my judgment to come up with a $2 per meter figure. On the one hand, I wanted to keep it as low as possible because I don't think the cost should be assigned to the individual opt-out customers. On the other hand, I thought there should be a charge that was large enough to inhibit harmful behavior. So I use my judgment based on typical average monthly bills for California utility service.
Thank you. Mr. Wilmer? You've advocated in your proposal that the charges that had been adopted by the Maine Commission also be applied here. And I'd like to get a sense of why you feel it's appropriate to do that for the utilities in California.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. I looked at the work that's done by, I can't remember the Maine's power utility. I don't know if this is on or not.
Can you check and see? I'm not hearing.
CMT. And according to their calculations, it was $4 per month and $12. Correction, $40 for the initial charge to do that, and $12 recurring charge. And they had a 50% discount for those costs, the initial cost of the monthly charge for low-income people. And they did have a business plan or business model as part of that was submitted to the commission. So in our detailed proposal, I used those figures on it.
Okay, and what I'd like to get a sense of is, my understanding was that had been part of a settlement, those or the opt-out charges. I'm not sure if you have further information on that, but that the $40 and the $12 was not what had been originally been proposed by the CMP?
I believe the People's Council in that state came up with a settlement, but I'm not aware of the terms and conditions of that settlement.